Hey, it's Warren Huart here. Hope you're doing marvelously well. I am sitting here in Los Angeles, and Frenchie Smith is all the way over in Austin. Is that correct?
That's right.
And
Hello.
we did not talk to each other about what hat we were going to wear today. Dun, dun, dun. Full disclosure, I went grey at 16. So I dye my hair. Everybody knows this. There's mentions about it. So when I'm wearing a hat, it's because my hair dye is showing really badly and the grey's coming through. Hey, I'm just being blunt. So it wasn't a story of hat, but I think we're very well coordinated today. I should have got my glasses out as well, really gone for it.
We can pause this, we could start all over.
So how are you today?
I'm fantastic. It's almost noon for me here in sunny Austin, Texas. So I've got a little bit of an advantage. So except I know you wake up even earlier than I do.
That's married with
I'm
kids.
doing really great. We just came out of a series of projects back to back, and I have a few days off just to sort of revel and us having a great session.
What have you been working on?
The session that we just came out of at the Bubble, this was all kind of put together last minute on the back end of South by Southwest. There's a group out of New York called Courtesy Tier, and it's a band that Sandy Robertson, who's the owner of World's End, my manager,
And a mutual friend
he's
of
also
ours.
yeah,
Good
he's
friend of mine.
he's also the band's manager, and
Wonderful.
I'd asked the band to be a guest at an unofficial showcase that I do annually at South by Southwest. And I think between Sandy and Sean Rolie, my engineer, and myself, we were just reveling in how great the band was. And we just put them right into the studio literally like 14 days after the festival.
Oh, it was fantastic. How was South by Southwest this year?
For me, I'm just watching it kind of change. It's so vast, and as a consumer, I go out and see and hear everything I need to see and be a part of from midday noon until about 10 at night, and I'm done. And I know that all the proper showcases are happening in the evenings, but it's just so vast, and you really can rock and roll and go kick some ass and just have your mind blown at 3 p.m. That's where it's kind of evolving to.
How long have you been in Austin your whole time?
I moved here from a smaller city in Oklahoma called Durant in 1990. So I've lived in Austin about 26 years. So I've gotten to see it grow a little bit.
I was about to say, you probably have experienced the whole length and life of the festival.
It was probably a few years old before I had moved here.
Oh, it was?
But
Right.
Yeah, but in all seriousness, at that time, it really happened on one street.
Yep.
And the shows were very consolidated. They started in the evening, and if there was anything happening during the day, it was just extremely social, or maybe bands and other bands discovering other bands, or just really there's a lot of room for business to be conducted. Now it's just madness, but and I enjoy it. It's quite manic.
When people ask me what I think South by Southwest is like, I always say it's spring break for musicians.
Absolutely. It really is.
Yeah, it's one big party for a full week of just people, drinking and having fun. And but I the first time I went was I want to say 94.
Okay.
So a long time ago, and I think maybe it was 93, but it was the year that Beck played, when he did like his sort of coming out, as it were, before Loser, or maybe at the time Loser was coming out. I was talking to Rob Snaff about it. I don't remember. I haven't got the timeline that good. It's amazing 20 years later, and all of the details that you remember intimately suddenly disappear. So I don't even remember what year it was. But at that time, it was still, probably have a much better idea than me, but it was still relatively small. And it definitely felt like this really cool, still underground festival where you could discover stuff for the first time.
It's any year that is for any year for a music festival that has to follow up with, well, last year we debuted Beck.
Yeah.
That's just going to be hard.
Yeah.
How do you bounce back from that? I mean, he's someone I really idolize.
Now, I want to talk to you about, because we're Facebook friends as well, and I'm having a good week because Ace Frehley's record came out, and it's either number 1 or number 2 on the rock charts, depending on which chart you look at. And apparently, there's a number 1 album by some guy called Santana, and now you worked on that.
well.
So tell me about that.
That was a really endearing. That was endearing to just see visually, just to see the rock charts and see Ace and Santana just right up there. And yep. I took a lot of esteem knowing that you worked on the Ace record, and that really actually meant something to me. And the Santana record is that was tracked by Jim Reitzel, and he has a long relationship with the group. And there's a very particular studio that Carlos likes working in. But to back it up a bit, Sean and I, my engineer, we have been listening to the band's demos for years. And Gregg Rolie is a dear friend. So he's obviously fronting vocally this record.
Oh, I see.
So I've been privileged with Sean to hear these demos and hear Gregg play some any ideas he's working on for quite a while. And there's even going to be a Gregg Rolie record that will drop after this record when the time is right. And it's an album we produced at Sonic Ranch. I worked at it in Austin at the Bubble at our place. So my role was helping produce the vocals with Gregg. So right. Once the live tracking was done, and just being obviously on the whole band side, but just creating a very calm environment where he could go in and just really kick ass, like with all the fire and madness of a 23-year-old guy, and just encourage that.
How old is he?
Well, he's not 23.
Oh, okay.
But the genius of
sure.
of the madness of youth, I think, is part of the origins of the real Santana. So,
sure,
just creating an environment where he could tap into that madness and it not, he doesn't have to take a morning after pill to recover from it.
Absolutely. Well, Abraxas is still one of my top 10 albums. That was just such an amazing album. And I think as a guitar player, and that's how I came up, I think every guitar player has a Santana phase where they just obsess about Santana for a while and work on his riffs and try to figure out how he played Black Magic Woman and all that kind of stuff.
I think between that iTunes chart that came out last Friday, you have Ace Frehley, Neil, Sean, and Carlos right in the and Slash, because Guns N' Roses was recharting. You have those four guitar
I recorded
players.
Slash here with Ace. It was so much fun.
I stalk you on the internet. I'm very well aware. Like, as far as I'm concerned, there's only one guitar player missing from that group, and it's Eddie. That's well, then you got to throw Angus in there. Okay, we got a few more. Kevin Shields from My Bloody Valentine to make it even weirder. Okay.
Yeah, no, weird is good. No, I'm all about like Robert Fripp. He's one of my favorites.
Whew. Yeah, we could just talk about guitar players the rest of this interview.
Sure.
I suspect you play guitar very well. I also understand that about you and your skill set from your days back in Star 69.
Yeah, that was only guitar playing was in the studio for that one. Live touring, I played bass.
Okay.
It was which, to be honest, for those people watching, if you had a gig in a band, the most fun gig is definitely playing bass, because you just, I did actually use 2 pedals, but most bass players, it's a cable in the amp. Off you go, especially when you're young and you're single, you can spend more time, whatever. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. So look, let's talk a bit more. Let's talk a bit more about you. What was your journey to get to be to become a studio owner and make great records and be involved in all these wonderful albums that you're involved in?
Well, I think it's very similar to yours, minus I didn't leave my home country. I came up playing in groups, and I've lived in Austin since 1990. Some of the groups, just because of the timeline, it's a little hard to find us on the internet. You know, it's back when Paper Trail actually needed to exist. So,
sure.
But my first professional group that I played in, I sang in and played lead guitar, was called 16 Deluxe, and so our leg up. This is earlier 90s. By 1994, so this is now 22 years ago, we were signed to a label that's now gone, but it was owned by King Coffee from the Butthole Surfers, and he had a partnership with Touch and Go Records. So it was called Trance Syndicate, and it was run by King Coffee and Craig Stewart. And to be fair, if I look back on my life, King Coffee from the Butthole Surfers, one of the craziest bands ever, is who put me in the record business. And that was the start. And then obviously that band and the timeline, and being an alternative band and doing kind of noisier pop music, it was a very applicable group to be on a major label. So we'd eventually gone on to sign with Warner Brothers Records. And you know, that whole thing had its peaks and valleys, but one of the best things that happened to me is I really learned that I loved the recording studio. And
Right.
And then eventually I would start another group with a new cast of cats. They kind of dragged me into it. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to, but they kind of talked me into it because they knew I didn't have anything else better to do, and I could record the band. And that was a band called Young Heart Attack. So that timeline takes you from like 1994 to from early 2001. And so we eventually signed to XL, and we're a lot busier in Europe and in the UK than we were in America. But by being in a band, I think that I found the studio. Once I found the studio, it actually made me be more excited about being in a band, which was drawing esteem, and being in awe of other musicians helped me sustain my ability to keep writing and participating. Kind of unusual.
So when you went and made records, was there a particular producer that you sort of felt like inspired you learned from?
I mean, just you know, just like the atypical thing, I'd always looked at album credits to see who these mystical beardy characters were that were making these records, and the mysticism of how records were made. You know, it's some of those secrets are a bit out of the bag now, and that's, I think, that's some of the power of Produce Like a Pro. Is, you know, knowledge isn't something that has to be held on to like a secret. And in fact, if it's shared, you know, we're all encouraging each other to make better and better and better and better records, thusly keeping value to masters and sound recordings. You know,
I agree.
So I think early on, I definitely would have memorized Roy Thomas Baker's name, and by the 90s, Alan Mulder's name just kept popping up. Like, oh my!
I agree.
Everything this guy's working on is great. And definitely, I became a real mind-blowing group for me in the early 90s. Was I loved the Flaming Lips, the blend of like chaotic rock and pop they had, and those records were being produced by the band, obviously, with this guy Keith Cleversley, who didn't make a lot of records, but they're all very impactful. Dave Fridman, but those were some of the people that I was kind of following, and the deeper I got into making records, you know, I would go to the library and try to check out any book I could about record making, and look at pictures of Trident Studios and try to read something about Ken Scott, who it's his birthday, by the way, today.
I wish him happy birthday.
Yeah, absolutely. What a star.
Oh, I mean, hunky dory.
Yeah.
I rest my case. That you know, yeah, hunky dory. Probably the most influential record for me ever. It's the one that I always come back to.
I just don't know how he got the ride sound on Rocket Man. Like, how'd you do that? I wrote him an email and asked him. He goes, I don't remember.
Yeah, exactly.
Happy birthday.
Yeah,
but I, you know, I like you. I try to see the fraternity in other producers, and no one quite understands us like each other. And I feel that any opportunity that's meant for me to participate in truly comes my way. And I really enjoy the brotherhood and the sisterhood of knowing as many producers as possible. And there really are the only people that truly understand us is us. It's not necessarily some really brilliant person we've worked with at record labels, or, you know, sometimes the artists don't really understand our end as well. And but we know each other. And so that, if anything, that's I could throw at produce like a pro, is being a pro is to really look for your worldwide as a producer in a young or older mind. It doesn't matter what your age, but just have a gang of other like-minded people that you respect, and you see excellence in them, and then objectively look at what you're doing.
Oh, I agree. I think the sense of community that's being created around this has been really exciting for me. You know, I do this academy where I give my tracks away to be mixed. Every month I get a different song, and they've been recorded in different environments. Some are recorded here, small drum kit. Others are in big studios. Last one I did, or the current one I've done, is actually recorded on tape and then transferred into Pro Tools. And it's interesting. What I love is everybody's learning and then taking that information and applying it and applying it and applying it. And now we're like 4 songs in. You just see all these guys' level of mixing has just jumped up. But I will say it's been interesting because I don't get to examine and look at my own work enough until I start doing that. And each month I'm bringing up new multi-tracks. Last month I listened to my multi-track and I listened to my mix and was like, ooh, that wasn't very good. You know, and then
Who did that?
And then a couple of guys have remixed it, and there's 1 or 2 guys, I think at least 2, and I say guys and girls, couple of people that have actually done better mixes of my work than I did.
Well, you know, that could be you halfway being a little critical and a little bit crazy. So I'm sure the first mix was amazing, and you were working with the moment of impact, and that objectivity of the other mixer. Maybe you became a giant fan of what they were doing. So maybe your mix wasn't that bad.
It wasn't that bad.
I'm trying to encourage you.
Thank you. Sonny?
you know, there's 2 other producers I want to mention. Just they're more historical. But I have to say that between the British, the Americans, and the Australians, somehow the evolution of that worldwide figure and the blend of all of us, those are my favorite record makers. And I'm not trying to start a world war here, but right. There's 2 Australian. Well, there's just the significance of the Vanda and Young partnership.
Yeah,
and Mark Opitz, who came up. He produced the first In Excess record. The superstar Australian of the century, of multiple centuries, Mike Chapman.
Sure.
So those are I just wanted to throw a little bit of love to Down Under. I'm so inspired by those cats.
Yeah, and of course South Africa, because isn't Mutt Lang originally from South Africa?
He I think he was. Yeah.
And he sort of, I think he went to England first. I mean, he did the Boomtown Rats.
I think he did Clover as well, featuring a young Huey Lewis. So he was really paying some dues.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, you know, I was talking about Howard Benson the other day, and, you know, people know Howard Benson from like these real, you know, I choose my words carefully, but like straight ahead, big sounding Daughtry rock records. Everybody's like, yeah, you know, Howard Benson. I mean, Howard was working with Sandy back in the 80s, doing like In the Trenches. There was a rock band I was talking to recently, and I'm completely blanking on their name. Little Caesar. And he did a Little Caesar record in the 80s, and they told me he was doing like 15, 18 hours a day, trying to make it, you know. And so I think it's very easy to sort of look at somebody's success now and say, oh, it's easy. But because I think part of, because I get a lot of people asking me, and it'd be an interesting question to throw at you, what was my big break? And I always say my big break was working 15 to 18 hours a day and having so much of a resume that I got more opportunity. I can't point to a time where I went, and I was talking to Tommy Vicari yesterday, and Tommy is now this massive film mixer. He did Bridge of Spies this year and The Big Short. So he had 2 Oscar nominated, and he also mixes the Oscars live. He's the live mixer controls it. So this guy's like, and he was George Duke's engineer, and had a #1 with Billy Pratt. I mean, the guy's got a resume as long as your arm. And he told me his story was starting work at Capitol Records in the mailroom at 8 a.m. till 5, then going to work in the studios until the early hours of the morning. For years.
Yeah.
And so, you know, what would be his big break? The fact that he worked 18 hours a day for 4 or 5 years before he got even, and then he went to A&M to assist and didn't even get into the chair for another 3 or 4 years beyond that. So it's a different world now because of the technology that we have, but there's definitely that work ethic that these guys had, and the fact that, you know, they're observing Phil Ramone and you know, and Al Schmidt and guys like that, and watching them make records. And by that, they're absorbing the process and understanding there's a lot more to it than just the technical. There's a lot more, I hate the word, but psychology involved, a lot more encouragement of the artist and making them feel comfortable and not being combatant and stuff like that. Because as an artist, I know this is a long question, I'm sorry. As an artist, I used to find that, you know, a lot of producers were probably a lot more skilled than I was when I was 21 years old. And some guys were encouraging and pulled stuff out of me, and I remember them vividly. And then a couple of other guys were dismissive and were just like, oh, that I couldn't play the performance quick enough. And now I look back at it, and those guys don't have a career. The local guys I work with, they don't work in music. The ones that were like dismissive and knew best and had a big ego. And yet the guys, actually the more successful I ended up working with guys that were more understanding and more easygoing and more encouraging. Anyway, long question. My whole point is like, what was your experience working with when you were in bands, producers and engineers? Was there guys you physically worked with that you were inspired by and you learned from?
I mean, that was a long question, and I loved every bit of it.
I have a propensity to waffle on. Everybody knows this.
Well, but there was actually one thing that the first thing that you said was, you know, what was my big break, and you know, I think my big break was just being is the same asset I have now. Is I'm just too dumb to stop. And what I mean by that is,
can I make that the title of the interview?
Absolutely.
Too dumb to stop.
and but what I mean, and that's going to work great for the internet. It's a brash headline, but in all sincerity, the fluidity of of starting sessions and seeing them all the way through, and just having humans interaction, and that it's something that I'm very accustomed to. And if I only did a few records a year, maybe some of the surprises in the tracking process, or any of the challenges, like how can we maximize the impact of this chorus? It's right here. What can we do to make this better? And instead of finding that frustrating, or as some kind of giant prison wall, it's just a wee hurdle that you jump over, and being fluid with it, right? That's the biggest break I had, is that I didn't have to basically call up every person that I know, their first, middle, and last name, to record them. And that was my initial, just because I'm from a city, I'm a musician, so I would know my initial pool of people to record. And once I wrung that dry in probably 2003 or 4, somehow I was just fortunate enough to be able to meet people like yourself, and go into the recording studio, and our bond was that we all collectively enjoyed their band. Me outside of it enjoyed their band. I was a fan, and obviously they're the maniacs pushing it up the hill, so they love what they do. But just staying fluid enough and being ready for the opportunity and the moment in time where I can truly have a real client base, instead of just punishing my friends at a bar. Let me record you tomorrow.
But punishing your friends at the bar and recording them is how you got your chops.
Yeah, absolutely. And then but all the classic records that we would look at, it would have been impossible for Mutt Lange to know everybody that band knew. They just met each other, and they had whatever meeting they had, and they figured it out or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the music was the bond, and the goodwill towards the music, and taking chances, and that esteem for this goal outside of themselves, making a masterful recording, was their bond. And then you're in that for 2 or 3 days. You all of a sudden those other people in the room your whole life. That kind of bond, and when the session's going great, that transcends how long you've known someone. It's just, you're there.
Wonderful. So was there anybody you could consider to be a mentor?
For me, I was fortunate to my local cats that I really looked up to. I definitely saw, I could see that this thing, record producer or recording studio persona, I could see it as a craft through other people in my community some time ago. And they're still, these cats all have massive impact on me. Brian Beattie was probably the first record producer I ever met. And he's an amazing artist and musician, and played in bands in Austin, and toured all over the country. But before I had moved to Austin, I knew his name as Brian Bong Wizard Beattie, credited on the back of a Dead Milkmen record. So he had actually produced that album, Beelzebubba, that was on the top. It was before Total Request Live, but it was the #1 requested video on MTV in like 1988 or 89, and that was a underground band having that kind of cultural impact. And he was the producer. He didn't get the hamburgers for the band. He may have, but
Sure.
For him to have such a high role in that record, and someone that I met quite early into moving into Austin, and how cool he was, that he had time for people, and there was something very humorous about him, engaging. There was something different about him, and I was like, whatever that guy's doing, I want to be like him, and I still do. And then
that's wonderful.
The and then John Crosland was a record producer in Austin, Texas. Dave McNair was another like big brother. Michael McCarthy. So these were some guys that definitely had chops.
Dave McNair, I know, work very well. Yeah, that's it.
And they wouldn't be too embarrassed if I asked them a question about audio, or, once I started putting my own lab together, like, I'd have this really elaborate question, how do I get a vocal sound? Well, get it.
How do I mix a song?
Yeah. Remember that time we were in the studio and it was $2,500 a day?
Yep.
And I'm working on an 8-track quarter-inch. You got any tips on how I could get it to sound that awesome?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Look, I get those questions every day, and I usually find that for me these days, I answer with questions because I need to know what their understanding is so I can help guide them. Because, like you say, those open-ended questions, I want to naturally help somebody, because actually giving somebody a very specific answer can hinder them. Because the answer to a lot of those questions is, yeah, have this gear, this gear, that musician, all of these really over-the-top, expensive, and difficult to reproduce solutions would get you there. But the reality is like, what do you have? Oh, you just have a two-input. You have a two-input I/O. Okay, how good is it? What is your microphone, first of all? Oh, you don't have a condenser mic. Okay, so well maybe an SM57 will work a lot of the times for vocals, but not for a girl, pretty pop vocal. So I ask them those questions so I can sort of and I can come off as opinionated, and the reason why is because I watch. I want people to get away from the dogma. I'm sure you do as well, because you came up in an indie way like I did. And I felt like some of the elitism when I was getting started stopped me. There was a lot of hurdles in my way and actually stopped my development. So I'm trying to, remove as much of that as possible. So talking to guys like yourself, we can make this, we can shatter some of these sort of like illusions, because there's so many things that you can do that are about creativity. And as you're talking about, and what I'm getting a lot from our conversation here, is that you're more into the idea of actually getting performance out of people and having relationships and making them feel comfortable. All of the guys you've talked about how easy it was to relate to them and how comfortable they made you feel, so that inspired you. We haven't had a conversation yet about 2K being boost or cut.
No, I don't even think I hear that frequency anymore. Well, it really is. It really is about content, and one of the things that if the show is called Produce Like a Pro, the future of recording studios and people being sought out as a third party that joins the collective dream of a creative enclave. There's definitely times for us to kick back and just accept the performances coming down the chain, and allow ourselves to be wowed by it in the balance of acceptance and question everything. But then again, we are the self-appointed pro that listens to the playback through those stereo speakers every day. And so, the more, even if it's some kind of buddy deal, let's record 10 songs in the course of 2 days, every instrument. It's, if you're going to be a producer, you have to encourage to get the best performance, the most cohesive song arrangement you can within the timeshare allotted. and maximize it, because we really don't know how these songs are going to hit the internet, hit the streets. You don't we can't have any kind of trajectory of what a little band or what they'll be in 2 years from now. And then the track that you did over that weekend is talking to a large audience. Just being prepared for the alchemy of it, and the buck stops here. I mean, the responsibility of the record producer now, if we actually are on our A game, we might be the conduit to this little band becoming a much bigger band. And it may not be overnight, but but some of the A&R relationships that where record labels had staff that could fly around to city and just go attend your rehearsal for a series of 5 days. Some of those budgets have been diminished, but it's alive and well in the producer community. And so I think as far as the future of recording studios or the record producer, they're quite different subjects, but they do liaise into each other. I do think just simply recording people is going to be a thing of the past. That role is going to be diminished. Even if you're the house engineer at a beautifully equipped studio, it's there's, in my mind, if no feedback, encouraging feedback is given through the talkback monitors or any kind of dialogue before the session, I think it's best for bands just to get an apogee duet and record themselves. I think that's where it should all go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's interesting, and I talk about this a lot, but 3 of the biggest songs of the last 10 or 15 years are demos.
Oh wow! You got tell me which ones.
Well, they're all quite obvious. "Someone Like You" by Adele. I know that because I co-own the studio. Is a couple of mics we threw up on a piano, and her and Dan worked and finished up the song, writing it. She sung 3 vocal takes. He played the piano once or twice. The comp was a verse, a chorus, a verse, a bridge. No word by word, just a couple of things, no tuning, whatever. Sent off as the demo. Somebody else, who remained nameless, produced the track and added a whole bunch of strings and orchestra and all that kind of stuff to it. And the story goes, because my engineer at the time was the guy that recorded it, told me he had a conversation with her, in which she said she had played the demo to her mum, and her mother had cried because it's a beautiful song about her breakup that she'd just been through. And then a year later, when the finished version with all the bells and whistles was on it, she sent it to her mum and said, "What do you think?" And again, this is all hearsay, but I love the story. Her mother goes, "Oh, it's really nice, but I cried when I heard the demo." So she went to bat. She went to bat for it. She went back to the label, and the label ultimately, the label say, was not in America; it was in England, where, as I'm sure your experiences knows, it's a little easier for up and coming people to get music out. There's less of the business side that we have here.
Sure.
And so over there, they just went, "Okay, we'll put that version on the record," and went back to the American label and said, "That's the way it's going to be." And that happened with a lot of songs on the record. Hence, a lot of up and coming producers got 2 or 3 guys there got great credits. And because they went with the best thing. So anyways, that one. And then, of course, I worked with I've done 3 albums, Daniel Powter, and Daniel did Bad Day 7 years before, or 6 or 7 years before it was released eventually, when he was still like in his mid-early 20s, in his parents' front room on a Roland RD200 piano. And whatever crappy mic, he doesn't remember what mic it was, because it was just that, with his friend. And they were in his front room. He played the piano down on the digital piano, sang the vocal. Flash forward 6 or 7 years, they're re-recording the record, and they can't beat the vocal and they can't beat the piano performance. So they keep that, and I believe they kept some of the other elements. I'd have to ask him, and they just recut some drums and bass, I think. I know he said definitely the bass, maybe the drums as well. But the point is the demo, mute everything else, the demo is the song. And then I talk about it. This is my personal opinion, and it's not so much the demo, but think about Lord, think about Royals, think about that song. What makes that song? It's the vocals and the song and the writing. The lyric is incredible because it's an Australian artist who, you know, who's still on their money in Australia and New Zealand and Canada and England and many other countries, still has the Queen on their money, you know. And so coming from England, you know, I'm not royal family bashing, just talking a sort of reality, you know, that's still the sort of ultimate, you know, we have movie stars in America, but in a lot of countries in the world, it's like royal family is like the ultimate sort of, you know, we see that as being like the pinnacle of whatever fame. So she writes this song from that perspective. You know, we could be like royals. The harmonies are incredible. The vocal, it's all about her. And then you listen to it and it's like a simple drum beat and an occasional bass note that comes in. So my point is like, it's not about the production, it's about the song. So you listen to these things. All these three songs are some of the biggest songs of the last 15 or 20 years.
And the believability of it.
Yeah, the believability. It's all about the creativity. Not one of those songs. Yes, you could argue it. It is about the production because the production isn't big on them. It isn't. It is about the production in as much as the production doesn't take over in the song. But Tommy Vicari said to me yesterday. He was working with Quincy Jones, and Quincy Jones said, I love this quote, the three most important things in music are the song, and the song.
Yeah. I mean, just really right there.
Yeah.
And really just, you know, despite the genre, whether it's pop music or it's, you know, experimental, like kind of guitar rock, you know, where maybe the dynamics are the hook, you know, but, you know, is it played well and is the arrangement engaging, and is it worthy of people's attention span? Because it's so easy for us to consume music. We really, I mean, all we have to do is maybe click a few buttons and then all of a sudden we really have this amazing world of data available to us. And then, you know, what we're as the producers, you know, we're trying to somehow look at the song at hand, the group of individuals at hand, and set our whole team up for the ultimate transference. Well, we're inside the story right now. We're inside the gang. We know the chatter in the room, and it's close to all of us personally. But if we do it really well, it will leave us, and the ultimate transference will happen, and a fan will think it's their song. So that's all I want to happen.
No, that's I love that quote. Yeah, a fan will think it's their song. I mean, that's, you know, I grew up a classic rock fan, a new wave fan, a punk fan. You know, that's my era. But ingrained in me is Queen and Bowie. Obviously the Beatles and Lennon, huge influence on me. But my first bands that I loved were Queen and Bowie. And, you know, that's me. You know, if somebody was to say you could only choose, you know, half a dozen songs, it'd probably be all Queen and Bowie songs. And it's not necessarily, they're just the ones that are in my DNA. And I was young enough to do exactly what you just talked about. They became my songs. They're like,
that's right.
Such an emotional connection with them. It's funny, I did just a sideline for a second, because this is an interesting conversation, because I want to turn it back to you after this. I was asked to do an internet radio thing a few months ago, and it was fun. And it was one that's done down in the Mint, and it was a lot of, you know, in LA. And I go down there.
Oh, is it John Anderson?
Yes. So I do John's show. I do John's show. And it was great. I go there and we're there a couple of hours early. So we hear all of the music they're playing. And they're playing like super hipster stuff, like hip hop that isn't quite hip hop, that's kind of indie rock, you know. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening and I'm like, oh dear. And they're playing more and more stuff and some country and some, you know, all very hip stuff. And I get up and the first thing I say is, I'm like, you know, guys, my playlist is going to be a little different to this. And my playlist was literally John Lennon, Supertramp, ELO, The Clash. I think I had one Clash song in there, two Queen songs. You know, my top 10 songs. I'm like, and Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics, and I'm just like,
oh yeah,
you know, I'm like
heavy track.
Yeah, heavy track. Because when that came out, when I was a kid, it was on the radio. There was nothing like that. These were like mind-blowing songs. And I'm just like, I suppose if I had listened to the show and done my thing, I could have, you know, gone out of my way to find the B-side of the B-side of the only released in Holland version of a Clash song that I could have played and pretended that it was a huge influence on me. But that's just not what it was like. I love big songs. Mr. Blue Sky by ELO and Bohemian Rhapsody are just like songs that changed my life. Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics. I mean, and there's nothing more punk rock than Sweet Dreams. That's all about Dave Stewart and his production and Annie Lennox's vocals and the songwriting. It's like, you know what I mean? I want it all, is what I'm trying to say. You know, I want it all. I want credibility and art, and I want the pop as well. I want it all. I like to swing for the fences. I want the big song with the art. And guys like Bowie in particular were able to do that. They could do it all on all kinds of levels. But so let's turn it back to you. Are there songs like that for you that just like are ingrained in you?
I mean, I think my earliest memory of having I think as a fan and as a child, I think I heard songs and production equally at a young age.
Sure.
And Witchy Woman, I could hear that as like a 4-year-old child and comprehend. I swear I'm not smart enough or ironic enough or sarcastic enough to make this up.
No, I understand.
I could pick up that whatever that reverb element was on the vocal, that I didn't know what it was, but it meant I liked the song because there was something otherworldly about the voice, and it attracted me. I think I heard Kiss quite early on as a kid, but you know, I grew up with an older sister, so you know, the 70s. She was a 70s consumer, and so we would listen to Alice Cooper, Van Halen, Journey, Bee Gees,
nice.
Wings, David Bowie, and then obviously is sad of a gateway as this was, you know, the death of John Lennon.
Sure.
was a gateway at that age to discover John Lennon,
yeah,
and to not only discover John Lennon, but then understand another name on records, Jack Douglas. I was a fairly good reader as a child, and see him proactive and one of these mystical reoccurring themes in Aerosmith records. That guy's cool.
He is.
And then,
well.
and I know. He lives and breathes, you know, I mean, his and the fluidity, too crazy to stop. So, but, you know, all of those, just the look and the smell of the 70s and the way iconology of the 70s worked. And being the age that I was, I didn't quite understand that Star Wars wasn't real. Kiss weren't real.
What? Wait there. Star Wars
isn't
real?
I still don't know it. Yeah.
Star Wars isn't real? No. It's a documentary. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Luke
the hairy guy's a chick. I'm going to tell you the truth. But just the all of that affected the way I heard music, and just the how elaborate and how glamorous it all was, and iconic, and you know, the 70s people didn't just do it modestly. They made statements, and I was a sucker for it. I think the 70s pop music, some of the boundaries that were able to be tested in commercial music, but they could still be quite experimental. But I think probably my favorite pop track. And it's a very simple track, but it's so elegant. I have to say it's above Bohemian Rhapsody, and I hate to admit this, but I'm Not in Love by 10cc. I think
it's a masterpiece.
It's my number one pop track.
No, that's hey, my hat's off to you. That's a masterpiece. First time I heard that, I'd still look all the hairs down on it. I mean, I remember being a kid and hearing it, and I was the same way as you. My dad bought me A Night at the Opera because he's a classical and jazz buff, which I'm very glad about because I grew up with classical and jazz in the house, mainly classical and some jazz. Ella Fitzgerald, Joe Pass was a huge influence, but loads and loads of classical music. So he bought A Night at the Opera and gave it to me as a little kid and was like, this is okay. It was my Christmas present. I got it for Christmas in 75. And he gave it to me and said, this is okay. This is the rock and roll that you're allowed to listen to, basically. Pretty funny. And he was right. And I can't help thinking about it. I'm sitting there watching you, with these big Beyerdynamics on. And I remember there were Sony headphones. And he had Sony headphones. And I would put the record on. And I would just sit there and listen. I listened to the first side of A Night at the Opera solidly for 2 weeks before I turned it over. And I remember, 2 weeks.
That's what I'm talking about.
And then after 2 weeks, I turned it over, and I listened to the second side, and I'm like, oh, this is all good. This is pretty good, but it's not good as side one because it had the Prophet song, and then it had Bohemian Rhapsody finishing up the album. God Save the Queen at the very end. And so I'm listening to it. And then, of course, like a week into it, I'm like, this is even better than the first. This is amazing. And then like 10 days, 2 weeks later, I flip it back to side one. So I'm now a month into the album. And I'm just like, my mind's blown. God, I forgot how good side one was. I mean, look.
The consuming music in the 70s, It really gave me a tremendous disassociation with giving a shit about anything my teachers were telling me at school. Sure. I mean, and excuse my French, but literally my escape plan from the dinner table is if I used any profanity at the dinner table and survived it physically, I was sent to my room. And I was asked to be quiet in my room. The second I got in my room, I put the cans on like I have on right now, and it was time to listen to records.
Yeah.
And that's when I started learning how to talk to women, was through the poetry of Kiss. It hasn't gone that great, but I'm still studying. We're going to figure it out.
You learned how to speak to women through the poetry of Kiss. I think he'll love to hear that.
Tell him I'm still not married.
I think he'll get a kick out of that too. He'll probably say, I did something right.
Okay.
The first time I went to South by Southwest while living in America was 96, I think.
Sure.
It's either 96 or 96. No, it was 96. And so I just got my first record deal in America. I'd had a couple in England, but my first record deal in America. And they're like, oh, we're going to take you to South by Southwest. You're going to showcase all this kind of stuff. So I was like, cool. And they're like, we didn't even have the album out yet. And they put us up in the Hilton. And I remember, I didn't know. I just thought, oh, this is how South by Southwest was. And I remember I used to wake up in the morning, walk down, get a cup of coffee, walk down onto the street, see some bands, go back up to the hotel room. Anyway, needless to say, that's the first and last time I stayed in the Hilton. Now I try to book it. It's sold out years in advance.
No, you were.
I was blessed and didn't realize.
It was kind of a golden era where I think South by Southwest may have, at that time for record labels, was to feature a band that was up and coming, and now it's definitely promo for somebody that's kind of already happening, and it's a little further along.
Did you do the panel with Tim this year, or have you done one?
I have done one with him before, and it was with Brad Wood, Tim, myself, the Hugh Padgham.
Oh, wow.
And then Chris Walla from Death Cab for Cutie. So For me, I was such a fan of just getting to hear what they were saying, but there was a tremendous just a bounce in all of our dialogue, and a lot of restraint, and a natural rhythm, and being able to communicate with all of them. It was great.
Yeah, I think for me, I just would have said to everybody privately, "Hey, can we just make sure we hear Hugh Padgham talk mostly?"
One thing that was interesting about Hugh is he was talking about the differences in recording in the past versus recording now, and just that he revealed that at one stage in his life he didn't understand there was a budget for the album. They
Right.
went to the studio. If it was the Police or Genesis, Phil Collins, it was done when it was done. And he empathized with the new generation of recordists, where you you really have to have a lot of choreography in place before you go book an elaborate room. And then I brought up, because of my studying of his work, and I said, well, there is some of the home recording that I do believe, if I may speak out of step here, that in the Air Tonight by Phil Collins, some of those elements in that master were recorded at home, and didn't you just feed them into the multi-track of the studio? And he goes, I did. I go, so you were ahead of the whole thing.
Right.
He goes,
Yep.
and then he had a giant laugh.
Yeah, no, I heard that as well, that they used a lot of his demos and stuff. I think that's fantastic. Yeah, it's a wonderful world we live in, though. The information age is absolutely incredible. The fact that we're able to, hey, look at this, we're on Skype, and you're in Austin.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's fantastic.
You're in Austin, and I'm in sunny Los Angeles, although it looks equally as sunny there in Austin.
Well, you're with me in my house, so if you look behind, you can see a map of America. So
Right.
There it is.
Yep.
The thing you dreamed of as a wee lad.
Well, I used to just look at the back of albums, and like yourself, and look at all these names, and put in my mind, I'd put all together what I thought it was like. One of the biggest ones, and one of the biggest thrills for me with working with Jack Douglas, for instance, is I had exactly the same experience that you did. When John Lennon died, it just accelerated my need to know about the Beatles, because it's interesting. It was only 10 years before, but that 10 years before, when you're a little kid, seems like a generation before.
Yes.
I talk about the 80s and the 90s to my kids, and they look at me like, the 80s, the 90s, like it's this sort of, but that was my heyday. 80s and 90s was my heyday. That's when I was in band. It was when I started to get into music and play music, and then the 90s was when I was in bands and touring, just like yourself. So I look at the 60s as like being this sort of mythical age. And when John Lennon died, first of all, it was horrific, and it just shook me to my core. But it just accelerated my learning, and I just bought everything. And I would look at the back of the records, and of course, Double Fantasy, and there it was, produced by Jack Douglas. And at that point, to be honest, Aerosmith had some success in England, but not as big as they did when they did in the late 80s and early 90s, when they did more pop-orientated stuff. But I was the same as you. I was such a fan that I went out and discovered other Jack Douglas records. So I went and discovered, Rocks and Toys. But then the stuff that really hit home for me was all the kind of New York Dolls kind of stuff. And to me,
the first Cheap Trick record.
I like, and Radio Ethiopia, just sort of there's that period of the mid-early 70s in New York, which being from England, is something I have to explain to Americans, because it didn't happen the same way over here. Our music scenes were so independent. But our music scene from 1976 all the way through the 80s, so from 76 to like 1990, was entirely driven by the New York and Detroit scenes. It was all about late 60s, Velvet Underground, Solo Lou Reed, Iggy and the Stooges, New York Dolls, and Patti Smith, and maybe a little bit of Alice Cooper. It wasn't as big, but those bands are what drove the music scene in England from like 76 to like 1990. You know,
MC5.
MC5, yeah, sorry, Wayne Kramer, I know Wayne. Yeah, MC5, those bands, Detroit and New York, they were the bands that dominated the British music scene. There's a great line from John Peel where he said, the Velvet Underground didn't sell many records, but everybody that bought a Velvet Underground record started a band. And it's the truth. I didn't know a kid when I was at school that didn't have Loaded. By the time I got to college, everybody had Loaded. Everybody had Raw Power. It was just like you were a Bowie fan and you went back and you bought Transformer. You were Berlin was a great record. Working with Dick Wagner was a huge thrill for me because Dick had played on those Lou Reed records. You know, it was all the artists that we love, like Gabriel and Kate Bush and David Bowie in the early 80s, were all driven by those artists. And I think that it's interesting because then, of course, America discovered the British new wave and punk artists and did their spin to it. But ultimately, we just got it all from you. And as Mike Bloomfield famously said, England took American music and sold it back to the Americans.
Absolutely. And then, of course, the way the technology and recording studio was rapidly evolving from the 60s. Maybe a recording studio was only a stereo environment and they didn't even have a compressor, versus in this city they would be using ribbon microphones and dynamics, or this particular studio started making limiters, but just the evolution of how creative the music was, and each studio was making an enhanced evolution into multi-track, noise reduction on multi-tracks, using the perverting sonic spaces to create reverbs uniquely because we didn't have a device that generated ambience. It's an incredible period. I mean, leading up to just even if you just follow the sonics of the Beatles, and then where they left off, listening to the creative work of any genre, actually, because of the limitations, and then the height of the business. In hearing the fidelity of the Fleetwood Mac Rumors, Toto, listening to Rosanna by Toto, how the fidelity of that, or My Sharona. I mean, those are epic sounding recordings. Never mind the Bollocks. That is a fantastic sounding recording.
Oh, Bill Price. Bill Price is, I know Sandy used to manage Bill Price.
Yeah.
I used to ask Sandy dumb questions. When I ever get to talk to Sandy off the record, I always ask him about John Martin, because he managed John Martin and did the Piece by Piece record. Or did you do Grace and Danger with, he did Grace and Danger with Phil Collins. So he tells me a lot of stories about that. Huge John Martin fan. And then I ask him about Bill Price, because actually for me, unwittingly, I have discovered that outside of the artists we've been name checking, one of the common denominators for me in the greatest sounding albums of all time is Bill Price. He's Nevermind the Bollocks. He's Pretender's first album.
Yeah.
Which
Fantastic.
is a masterpiece of an album. He's like pretty much any punk rock new wave album that was recorded in England that was worth listening to from like 76 to like 83. He was the engineer and the mixer in those days before they sent out to different mixers. And then of course, Nevermind. Then of course, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, and he's
Second Coming by Stone Roses.
Oh yeah, he's just everywhere.
I mean, so I think one thing that we're what's to summarize kind of what we've been talking about is as much as we have to be into ourselves, like, hey, I'm Warren, I'm into Warren. If I'm not into me, I'm not going to put the cape on and
you see my cape?
Yeah.
Damn.
But we're capable of playing our role of being confident and human and getting out of bed. Like today, whatever is coming down the path, I'm ready for this.
Sure.
And I think what I enjoy about our chat is that we see brilliance in other producers, and we're humbly trying to mirror what they did. And a very humanistic side, and then of course sonically, I know that we both made tremendous dedication, very dedicated to getting the sonics right. And if you got the sonics right, then you could get to the real human aspect of production. But I think having one of the biggest challenges is knowing that you have this amazing vocal chain going on. This is a U67. It's going into my BAE 1084. It's going into an 1176. It's going into Pulse Techniques EQ P1. Mm-hmm. And then I'm following up into an LA2A. And
nice.
I have the best vocal chain ever happened, and I'm still sucking. So at that point, maybe subconsciously, you try to think about some of the folklore and these alchemists that made these records. And certainly they were men and women. They were mortal. However, they knew the right thing to say. They knew the right thing to not say.
Sure.
But just the studying historically how records were made and being slightly a librarian about it and obsessive, it helps us discover our own superhero and be that kind of person that plays into the best we can into the history and the lineage of these great audio engineers and record producers.
I agree. I think we should wrap it up there. I love what you're saying. I'd like to say this: we are standing on the shoulders of giants. And
yes.
Well, thank you ever so much for your time. I'm excited to come out to Austin next year, and I want to do a little studio tour with you.
We'll just do a track. We'll do a track and we'll film it.
That sounds even better still.
So we can pick a year. We can go, let's make this the most hi-fi track of 1968 and do it like that.
You shouldn't say these things on camera because now I'm going to hold you to it.
Oh, it's fine. But Warren, it means the world to me to be a part of your world here. And, I want to give a little bit of a shout out to some of the other people that are on camera with me. Sean Raleigh, my engineer, Yayo Sanchez, my second engineer, Alex Lyon, the co-owner and mastering engineer at the Bubble. And you could find us at bubblerecording.com. And then you could find me directly at worldsend.com. And Sandy Robertson, probably, my just my guru and my life coach in all of this, and helping me keep a sense of humor and always look for the positive, So
that's wonderful.
So there's me in the interview, but now that we're not in the band anymore, Warren, it's you and Connor and Mark Loffman, the people that make the gear. They're our band members. So
absolutely.
There's some people that aren't visible that are, in my eyes, are the real stars of it, and they make me confident at what I do. So I want to give my team a shout out.
That's wonderful. Well, we'll put all the links you just described below as well. So please, everybody, go below and see all the links down there.
Okay.
So thanks, Frenchie. I really appreciate it.
So did we give enough shout outs to the brilliant people that are making our record sound so good, like BAE and Steve at Pulse Techniques?
I love Steve. I didn't know that you knew Steve Jackson that well. I love Steve. He's one of my favorite people. We definitely have his EQ P1S, two of those strapped on the 2 mix on every day. I have a pair on my mix as well. So thank you, Frenchie. I really appreciate it. That was an awesome time. As ever, please, everybody, subscribe. Go to producelikeapro.com. Sign up for the email list. Also, you can do the 14-day free trial of the Academy. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.